In recent years, I got used to buying curious objects whenever I found an antique shop. They were almost always small decorative pieces, nothing that drew so much attention, but on a trip to the interior of Oregon, I came across something that left me strangely intrigued. It was a Labubu, a doll that I had never seen up close, but that had an uncomfortable, almost disturbing look. He was on a shelf, a little dusty, and for some reason I felt an immediate urge to take him with me. I put the doll on the bookshelf in my room, just above the desk. I thought it would be interesting as part of the decoration, something eccentric that matched my taste. In the first days, it looked like just another object. I almost forgot I was there, until some little things started to catch my attention. Whenever I entered the room, Labubu seemed to be in a different position. Sometimes slightly inclined, sometimes facing more to the bed. At first, I thought it was just my impression. After a week, I began to notice that the displacement could not be a coincidence. I didn't touch him, but still, when I got back from work, there he was, pointed at another angle. I thought maybe I had moved without realizing it when cleaning the room or changing places. I forced myself to believe it, but the feeling that the doll was adjusting itself began to weigh. The first time something more direct happened, I was reading in bed, almost asleep, when I heard a dry noise. I looked at the desk and realized that Labubu was no longer there. I found him lying on the carpet, right in the center, facing me. I can't explain, but I had the clear impression that he was staring at me. I swallowed hard, put it back on the shelf, and tried not to think too much. The next morning, I suddenly woke up with the feeling that someone was in the room. It was just after 3 in the morning, and a heavy rain hit the window. When I lit the lamp, I found the doll again on the floor, this time closer to the bed, almost leaning against the side carpet. My heart raced. I remembered perfectly having left it on the bookshelf before going to sleep. From that night on, the episodes became more frequent. The doll was never in the same place as before. I've already found him facing the door, pointing to the wardrobe, and even partially overturned, as if he had dragged and fallen. There was no way that could happen without intervention. Even so, I kept trying to rationalize. Maybe it was the vibration of the house, maybe I was imagining things. But then came the detail that disturbed me the most. One morning, before leaving for work, I noticed that the bedroom curtain was ajar. I never left that curtain open, especially at night. When I looked at the bookshelf, Labubu was facing directly to the window. It was at that moment that I realized that the coincidence didn't make sense. It was as if the doll was observing something outside. I decided to hide it inside the wardrobe, at the bottom of a box. I thought it would be the end of that, but it didn't take long for me to hear, during the early morning, a noise inside the closet. It was as if something was moving inside, knocking lightly on the doors. When I got the courage to open it, I found the box on the wardrobe floor, and the doll sitting on top of it, facing me. At that point, sleeping became almost impossible. Every sound in the house made me alert, and I always ended up checking the room more than once. The worst was when I woke up with the corridor light on. I went to check, and to my shock, the doll was on the door frame, leaning against the wall, as if it had been left there on purpose. I decided to take it back to the store where I bought it, but when I got there, the place was closed. I asked neighbors and found out that the store hadn't worked for months. That left me groundless. It was as if I had bought the doll from a place that officially no longer existed. Today, he's still in my room, because I honestly don't know what to do. I've already tried to get rid of it. I threw it in the trash once, but somehow, the next day it was again on the bookshelf, exactly in the same place. I have lived with the constant feeling of being watched, and every time I turn off the lights, I know that when I wake up, Labubu will be in another position, closer, as if he were expecting something. I've always liked to collect unusual pieces, but I never thought of spending so much on a toy until I found that rare Labubu at a local fair. The saleswoman said that few units had circulated in the United States, and, even without being sure if it was true, I bought it without thinking much. That night, I was excited to make it more special, using some old props that I kept in souvenir boxes, a small felt hat, a metal chain, and even a children's scarf that belonged to my brother when we were children. After fixing everything, I put the doll on the living room table, satisfied with the result. Shortly after, I decided to go out to visit a friend who lived a few blocks away. The night was strangely silent, and soon I realized that there was something wrong in the air. Usually that rural neighborhood was full of nocturnal sounds, crickets, dogs barking, the wind swinging the trees. But that night, the silence was so heavy that it seemed forced, almost as if all the animals were hiding from something. While walking, I noticed the neighbor's dog running through the backyard, barking at something I couldn't see. He didn't stop sniffing the air, as if following an invisible trail, and then ran into the woods in a hurry. Seconds later, I heard a strange noise of hooves against the asphalt, and when I looked at the farm next to the road, I saw two agitated horses, hitting their paws on the ground and trying to escape the fence. The sound echoed through the empty field, and that made me uncomfortable, as if I were in the wrong place. I kept walking, but every detail seemed out of the ordinary. Near the entrance of an abandoned barn, I noticed a huge wasp nest, stuck right in the wood of the door. The problem is that I had passed by there in the morning, and that nest just wasn't there. It was impossible to come something like that out of nowhere in such a short time. I felt a pang in my stomach, but I forced myself to ignore it, telling myself that I was tired and paying too much attention to banal things. When I returned home, about 2 hours later, the strange feeling was still stuck to me. The silence of the night seemed even denser, as if the whole neighborhood was asleep in an unnatural way. I opened the front door slowly and immediately realized something wrong. The TV in the living room was off, but it wasn't just that. The cable was totally disconnected from the outlet, pulled behind the heavy furniture. For that to have happened, someone would have had to move the entire furniture, and I would have heard any of those noises before leaving. My heart started to speed up. I entered, locking the door in a hurry, and stood still for a few seconds trying to think of a logical explanation. Maybe you had forgotten to connect the TV. But I never messed with the cables, and there was no reason to be that way. I looked at the bookshelf, and there was Labubu, exactly where I had left it. But he didn't look the same. The doll was tilted slightly forward, as if it had been placed on purpose in that position, like someone who watches attentively my every movement. I went to the living room, and trying to convince myself that I was just tired, I turned on the TV again. But the feeling of being watched did not diminish. I sat on the couch, avoiding staring directly at the doll, but every time I looked away, the impression that he leaned a little more suffocated me. I even thought about getting him out of there, but something inside me paralyzed me, as if the simple act of touching him was to open a door I didn't want to go through. Suddenly, the neighbor's dog barked hysterically, as if he had seen an intruder outside. I got up in an impulse, went to the window and saw nothing but the dense darkness, illuminated only by a distant pole. When I looked at the shelf again, for a fraction of a second I was sure that Labubu's eyes reflected the light of the TV, as if flashing. My stomach turned, and only then did I realize that it was no longer just a coincidence. Something was wrong with that doll. I tried to rationalize what I had seen, telling myself that it was just a reflection of the screen, but the restlessness didn't let me. I walked to the shelf with heavy steps, stretched out my hand, and hesitated for a few seconds before touching the Labubu. The doll was too cold to the touch, as if it had been left in the open, and the feeling of holding something that should not be touched made me let go quickly. The heart was racing, and the room looked darker, as if the shadows accumulated around it. I went back to the room determined not to look at the bookshelf anymore that night. I closed the door, but even lying on the bed, I could hear small claps coming from the wood in the living room, as if something was moving by itself. The next silence was even worse, filled only by the rhythmic sound of my breathing and the suffocating weight of the idea that I was not alone inside the house. The next day, I found Labubu again on the bookshelf, but this time he was facing the bedroom door. I swear I didn't have the strength to touch it again. The memory of the night before consumed me, and the feeling that the doll knew that I was trying to ignore him left me on alert. I spent the whole day avoiding entering the room, as if that was enough to maintain the necessary distance. At night, I went to bed early, but I couldn't sleep. Around 3 in the morning, I heard a dry sound, like something rolling on the living room floor. I didn't have the courage to get up to check. I stayed under the covers, motionless, just listening. It was as if the doll had moved again, alone, just to remind me that he was still there. Since then, I can no longer be alone at home without thinking about him. And you? Would you have the courage to keep an object that seems to move on its own, or get rid of it immediately? When I bought that Labubu, I didn't think of anything but decoration. I've always liked different pieces, and his strangeness immediately attracted me. I put it on the parapet of the window of my room, where the morning light came in strong. I thought it would be interesting to see him illuminated every day, as if he were part of the environment. Before leaving for work, I was careful to close the window tightly, because the wind in my apartment is usually strong. I looked at him once more and he was firm, motionless, facing out. That night, when I got home, I turned on the light and noticed something strange. Labubu was not in the same position in which I had left. Now he was tilted slightly to the side, turned towards the bedroom door, as if waiting for me. The detail that gave me goosebumps was that he seemed to be further forward on the parapet, as if he had moved by himself. I stood for a few seconds, trying to rationalize, but the memory that no one else had the key to my apartment made me cold inside. I kept trying to think of rational explanations. Maybe the wind had entered through some creeve, even with the window closed, and moved the doll. But his weight was not so light, and to have leaned that way, someone would have to touch him. I took a deep breath and tried to ignore it. After all, I didn't want to get carried away by a meaningless paranoia on the first day with Labubu. In the following days, I began to notice his position even more. In the morning, before leaving, I left him carefully aligned facing the street, always firm in the same place. But every night, without exception, when returning from work, he was different. Sometimes a little turned inward, other times inclined as if it had slipped. But there was no sign of a fall, there were no marks, no noise during the day. It was as if he moved on purpose. One night, I decided to take a picture of the doll before leaving home. I put the cell phone very close, captured the image of it perfectly aligned in the center of the parapet, and left. When I came back, about 10 hours later, my first action was to open the camera and compare. I almost dropped my cell phone when I realized the difference. In the record it was straight, but before my eyes, Labubu was tilted into the room, exactly as if he had turned to me. That exceeded the limit of the acceptable. I closed the window, checked the locks, and even examined the parapet for marks, such as dust or scratches that showed that someone had moved. There was nothing. The only detail that made me even more uneasy was realizing that the curtain next to it was slightly displaced, as if someone had moved away to look from the outside. But I live on the 3rd floor, and there's no way anyone can go up there without equipment. That night, I lay down with the feeling of being watched. I tried to convince myself that it was just paranoia, but in the middle of the night, I woke up with the noise of the curtain swinging. The wind was absent, the window closed, but the curtain moved as if someone had passed their hand through it. My eyes went straight to the parapet, and there was Labubu, now positioned on the edge, leaning dangerously inward, as if he wanted to jump into the room. My heart raced. I ran to him, grabbed the doll, and put it inside a cardboard box that I sealed with adhesive tape. I spent the rest of the night awake, listening to small claps coming from inside the box, as if the plastic was twisting by itself. I didn't open it anymore. I just wanted it to dawn soon to put an end to that object. As soon as it dawned, I took the box to the basement of the building and left it on a dusty shelf, trying not to think about it anymore. However, that same night when I got home, my heart froze. Labubu was back on the parapet, exactly in the same place where I had put him for the first time. The box in the basement was still sealed, intact, as if it had never been opened. From that moment on, I realized that something was not right. I locked all the doors and windows, but I slept badly, with the weight of the feeling that I was not alone in the apartment. Every shadow in the room seemed to stretch more than it should, and every little noise made me hold my breath. The worst of all was looking at the doll, and feeling that he was not only positioned there, he seemed to be waiting for something. On the 3rd day, I got home before sunset, and the first place my eyes looked for was the window. Labubu was there, motionless, leaning forward as if trying to get out of the parapet. I stood at the bedroom door for a few minutes, without the courage to approach. I felt a pressure in my chest, a mixture of fear and certainty that somehow, that doll didn't just want to decorate my space. He wanted to be closer. That night, I locked him in the closet and put a chair against the door, but I woke up at 3 in the morning with a dry snack coming from the bedroom. When I turned on the light, I saw the closet door ajar, and on the parapet, the Labubu was waiting for me again. It was the first time I seriously thought about abandoning my own apartment, because deep down I already knew it was no longer me who lived there, it was him. And you? Would you have the courage to keep this doll at home after all this, or would you throw it away immediately? When I bought the Labubu for my 6-year-old daughter, Emily, I imagined it would be just another fun gift, a cute doll to decorate her room. On her birthday, she was radiant, hugged the doll, and carefully placed it on a chair, facing the bed. It was just a detail in the decoration, nothing special. However, a few nights later, Emily started calling me in the middle of the night, saying that Labubu changed places while she slept. I smiled, believing it was just the fertile imagination of a child, and reassured her by saying that the doll would always be exactly where she left it. But as the days went by, her complaints became more insistent. She told me that she woke up and saw him in different positions, sometimes a little closer to the bed, other times facing her directly. I checked every night and always found him in the chair, exactly as we left him. Until one dawn, I decided to enter the room to cover her, after hearing Emily moving restlessly in bed. That's when I froze. Labubu wasn't in the chair. I was standing, leaning against the head of the bed, a few centimeters from my daughter's face, as if watching her sleep. At that moment, a chill ran through my whole body. I knew Emily wouldn't have the strength or height to put the doll on her feet like that, and on top of that leaning against the headboard. The room was in complete silence, only the soft sound of her breathing. I picked up Labubu quickly, trying not to wake her up, and put him back on the chair. But even after that gesture, I couldn't sleep the rest of the night. I remained sitting in the hallway, looking at the ajar door of her room, feeling a strange tension in the air, as if I had taken into the house something that shouldn't be there. The next morning, Emily woke up excited, as if nothing had happened. He asked about the doll and I, with a heavy heart, lied, saying that he had fallen to the ground and I had just put it back in place. But the detail that didn't leave my head was the way she looked at me next. I told you, Dad. He walks while we sleep. There was no fear in her tone, just the conviction of those who tell the truth. It was at that moment that I began to wonder if that gift had brought something much more disturbing into our house. The next day, I decided that I would take Labubu out of her room. I put the doll inside a box in the living room closet, trying to prevent Emily from noticing. But the next morning, I woke up with a low noise coming from the corridor, as if something plastic was dragging on the floor. When I got up and went to check, I found the doll sitting exactly in the middle of the corridor, facing the door of her room. The detail that terrified me the most was that the box in the closet was still closed, with no signs of having been opened. I dragged Labubu back with my hands shaking and put him in the garage behind some heavy boxes. I spent the night awake, listening to creaking on the floor and a sound similar to light steps circulating around the house. What scared me the most was not the noise itself, but the feeling that the doll was moving deliberately, as if he knew I was trying to get rid of him. The next morning, when I went to wake Emily up, she was sitting on the bed, crying softly. I asked what had happened, and she replied, sobbing, that Labubu had talked to her during the night. He said that he whispered that he wanted to stay there, very close to her, and that he didn't like being locked up. My heart froze, but I tried to stay calm so as not to scare her even more. I just said I would solve that once and for all. I decided to take the doll away from the house. I entered the garage, and to my shock, the box where I had placed it was empty. I searched the entire garage until I found Labubu sitting in the back seat of my car, perfectly positioned in the center, facing the driver's seat. At that moment, I understood that it was no longer a coincidence or imagination. Something in that doll was wrong, and closer to my daughter. I decided not to tell Emily anything at that moment, but I knew I needed to get rid of that doll. I put it in a black bag and took it to a vacant lot a few blocks from home, throwing it at the bottom of a rubble bucket. I came back with the feeling of relief, trying to convince myself that it would end there. But that same night, around 3 in the morning, I woke up with the light noise of footsteps in the hallway. I opened the door slowly and saw something that made my stomach turn. The black bag was on the floor, torn, and Labubu was sitting right in front of Emily's room, facing her door. At that moment, I felt that I had completely lost control of the situation. I ran, took the doll and locked it in the trunk of the car. I didn't sleep anymore that night. I sat in the living room, listening to any slightest noise, wondering if it was really real or if I was going crazy. But one thing is certain, I could never look at Emily sleeping without being afraid of what could be watching her with me. The next morning, even before Emily woke up, I drove to a deserted road and left the doll in the middle of the bast, as far away from home as possible. I threw dirt and branches on top, trying to convince myself that I would never have to deal with that again. I spent the rest of the day exhausted but relieved, until at dusk, Emily called me to the room with an innocent smile. She pointed to the chair next to the bed and said, "Daddy, did you bring Labubu back?" He was there, sitting exactly where it all started. I don't remember the last time I felt so terrified. I never told this to anyone, afraid of looking crazy, but I know what I saw, and I know it wasn't me who put that doll there again. Since then, every night is a torment, and I can only think if I'm condemning my daughter to live with something that shouldn't be between us. And if it were you, would you have the courage to keep Labubu at home, or would you have already gotten rid of him at any cost? When I inherited my grandmother's house, I knew I would have a lot of work ahead of me. The place had been closed for years, and the attic in particular seemed loaded with forgotten memories. It was there, between dusty boxes and furniture covered by yellowish sheets, that I met Labubu. He was inside a wooden box, wrapped in a piece of torn cloth, his big and bulging eyes fixed, as if they had always been watching me. I can't explain why I decided to take it down, maybe because I found it curious, or just because I wanted to make some use of something that seemed to have belonged to the family. I put it on the shelf in the living room, imagining that it would be just another strange decorative item. In the first few days, nothing happened. But soon I began to notice a disturbing detail. Every night, around 3 in the morning, I heard footsteps coming from the ceiling. They were heavy, measured, as if someone walked slowly from one side of the attic to the other. The first time it happened, I thought it was imagination or even any animal. But as the days passed, the sound became clearer, almost rhythmic, and there was no denying that it seemed human. Each click of the boards above left me awake, paralyzed in bed, with my heart beating so loud that it seemed to fill the whole house. One night, I decided to gather courage and go up to the attic to check. I took a flashlight and climbed slowly, each step creaking under my weight. When I opened the door, the cold and heavy air enveloped me. I passed the light through the old furniture, the boxes and the beams covered with dust. Everything looked exactly like before, except for one detail. Labubu was there, inside the same box I had found him a few days ago. For a moment, I was paralyzed. I was absolutely sure that he was on the living room shelf when I went to sleep. I hurried down, almost stumbling on the steps, and ran to the living room to confirm. The shelf was empty. The space where the doll was looked strangely marked, as if the wood had kept its shape. That night, I could barely sleep. I kept repeating to myself that maybe I had moved the toy without realizing it, but deep down I knew that this was not true. The sound of the steps continued in the following nights, always coming from the attic, always at the same rhythmic rhythm, as if someone was walking in circles up there, along with the doll. On the third night in a row, I decided to leave the light in the living room on and lay on the couch, trying to fall asleep. Around 3 in the morning, I heard the noise again, dragged, slow steps, crossing the attic from one side to the other. My heart raced with each creaking. I knew that if I went up to check it out, I would find the doll again inside the box. The feeling was that he always returned there alone, as if that was his place. I decided to record the sound with my cell phone. I left the device recording while shrinking under the blanket. The next morning, when I heard the audio, the noise of the steps was clear, but what froze my blood was a dry beat, as if something had fallen, followed by a muffled crash. I went up to the attic immediately. The box was open, Labubu lying on his side, facing the stairs, as if he was waiting for me to arrive. That night, I decided to lock the box with thick adhesive tape, rolling several turns to ensure that it could not open by itself. I went down, but the noise came back shortly after. Heavy steps, scratches, and even a hollow sound, as if something hit the wood. My whole body locked in fear. I climbed slowly, and to my despair, the tape was torn at several points, as if it had been torn from the inside out. The Labubu was standing, leaning on the edge of the box, leaning towards the stairs. From that moment on, I started to avoid sleeping at home. I spent a few nights at a friend's house, but every time I came back, I found signs of movement in the attic, turned dust, new marks on the wooden floor, and even objects out of place. One night, gathering courage, I left the cell phone camera recording inside the attic, pointed directly at the box. The next day, when I saw the recording, I was paralyzed. At 2:57 a.m., the box moved by itself, sliding a few centimeters forward. At 3:03 a.m., Labubu simply appeared outside her, without anything having pushed or knocked down. I watched the video countless times, trying to find some hint of wind, shadow, or reflection that explained the movement. But the camera was static, and there was nothing around that could justify. What terrified me the most was the detail at the end of the recording. When Labubu appears outside the box, his head is slightly turned to the camera, as if he knew he was being watched. I turned off the video and, for the first time, I seriously thought about leaving the house. That night, I locked all the doors and windows and lay on the sofa in the living room, unable to go up to the bedroom. Around 3 a.m., I heard again the steps coming from the attic, followed by a slow drag, as if something heavy was being pulled. The noise continued until it stopped exactly above me. My heart raced, and I couldn't move. It was at that moment that I heard a dry snack coming from the ceiling, as if something had rested right there on my head. I didn't have the courage to check. Since then, I sleep every night with the lights on, and I still think about leaving this house for good. Would you have the courage to open the box again, or would you do like me and leave the house? I work many nights in my home office, surrounded by my collection of dolls. Recently, I bought a Labubu in an online store, and without thinking too much, I put it on the highest shelf just above the table where I spend hours typing reports. The figure, with his strange look and fixed smile, looked like just another curious item in the collection. That night, while reviewing documents around 2 in the morning, I heard a soft noise behind me, as if something plastic had slightly scratched the wood. I froze for a few seconds, trying to identify where the sound came from. When I turned around, I felt my stomach turn. The Labubu was on the ground, fallen, but not in the natural direction of the fall. Instead of tipping forward, as it would normally happen, he was closer to my chair, a few centimeters displaced, as if he had jumped or moved on his own towards me. I stared at the doll for a while, trying to rationalize it. Maybe I had put it wrong on the shelf, maybe some movement of mine would have made the table vibrate. But deep down, I knew I hadn't done anything that could justify that. I picked up the doll from the floor and put it back on the shelf, but this time I made sure to keep it very firm. I began to observe the environment more while working, trying to convince myself that it had just been an accident. However, minutes later, while typing, I felt a strange pressure in the air, as if the environment had become heavier, too quiet. Suddenly, the noise of something scratching would echo again, only longer, more dragged, as if it came from behind my chair. My heart raced. Without the courage to turn around immediately, I slid my eyes slowly to the reflection of the monitor and saw something that made me freeze. Labubu was again on the floor, but now leaning against the leg of the table, almost as if he had approached me. I turned around quickly, with choppy breathing, and I saw him motionless, with that fixed smile, looking directly at where I was sitting. I couldn't work anymore that night. I left the computer on, took the doll and locked it inside the drawer, but I still couldn't sleep. I swore I still heard the noise of plastic against wood, as if he was trying to get out. I decided that it wouldn't make sense to keep that at home. The next day, I put Labubu in a cardboard box and left it locked in the basement closet, out of sight. I worked normally that night, and the silence made me believe that I had solved the problem. But when I got up to go to sleep, I noticed something that left me without reaction. The desk drawer, where I had locked the doll the first time, was open again, and inside her, empty. I ran to the basement with a mixture of anger and fear, and when I opened the closet, I found only the cardboard box, empty. To this day, I don't know where that doll ended up. Sometimes, when I'm alone at night, I swear to hear the same sound of plastic scratching wood, as if it were still around, waiting for the right moment to appear again. And you, would you keep such an object at home after hearing and seeing strange things, or would you get rid of it immediately? I bought that Labubu in an online promotion without thinking too much, just because it looked different from everything I had ever seen. I put it on the shelf in the hallway, very close to the entrance door. It was a discreet place, where I could see him whenever he left or got home. In the early days, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. But I started to notice something strange the following mornings. The doll was never exactly in the same place where I had left it. Instead of being centered on the shelf, it appeared a few centimeters ahead, as if it had slipped. At first, I thought it was something in my head, or maybe I had bumped into him myself when I left in a hurry. But as the days went by, the pattern became clear. Every morning, Labubu was always a little closer to the edge of the shelf, as if he were advancing towards the door. On the third morning I noticed this, I bent down to check if there was any unevenness or inclination that could justify the movement. But the shelf was firm, perfectly straight. I put the doll back, this time pushing it back against the wall. I left for work, trying to ignore the strange feeling it was causing me. When I came back, hours later, he was again a few centimeters ahead. I started to observe more closely. I photographed Labubu in place before bed, and the next morning I compared it with the position I was in. It wasn't an illusion. The doll really moved. Despite the discomfort, I convinced myself that maybe it was better to keep that as a strange curiosity, a joke of my own tired mind. Until one morning, I woke up thirsty and decided to go to the kitchen to drink a glass of water. The house was silent, only the distant sound of the clock in the living room filled the environment. I lit the light in the hallway and felt my heart race. Labubu wasn't on the shelf. He was in the middle of the carpet in the hallway, well positioned, exactly between me and the entrance door. His eyes were turned to me, as if he had placed himself there on purpose to block the passage. I was paralyzed for a few seconds, not believing what I was seeing. My first reaction was to look around, trying to find some rational explanation. Had someone entered the house? But the door was locked, the windows closed. The feeling was suffocating. I took courage and approached, picking up the doll from the floor. It was heavier than I remembered, and the cold texture of the plastic seemed almost cold on my hands. I put it back on the shelf and went to sleep with difficulty, turning from one side to the other in bed until dawn. The next day, I couldn't take it anymore. I put the Labubu inside a cardboard box and left it in the trunk of the car. I planned to get rid of him on the weekend. I thought that, finally, that uncomfortable feeling would disappear. But that same night, when I came back from work and entered the house, I felt a chill run down my spine. In the hallway on the shelf, Labubu was there again, outside the box, staring at the door, as if he had never been removed. To this day, I don't know how to explain that. What I know is that I can't sleep peacefully anymore. Every time I pass through the corridor, I feel that the doll is watching me, waiting for the moment when I will finally make the mistake of letting him get even closer. And you? If I woke up at dawn and found an object from your house out of place, in the middle of the corridor, staring at you, would you have the courage to continue living there? When Rachel and I moved into that rented house, we expected nothing but common moving problems. Too many boxes, heavy furniture, and adapting to a new place. But on the first day, when organizing the master bedroom, we found a small doll stored at the bottom of the closet. It was a strange-looking Labubu, with big eyes and an almost mocking expression. We find it curious, but not disturbing. Rachel suggested leaving it on the dresser as an eccentric piece of decoration. In the early days, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. But in that first week, during the night, we began to hear soft beats coming from the room while we were in the living room watching TV. They were rhythmic touches, as if someone was walking slowly and scraping their foot on the floor. When we were going to check, there was never anyone, just the doll fallen on the floor, always a few centimeters closer to the bedroom door than it should be. At first, we tried not to give it importance. We thought maybe it was the house creaking or the wind hitting some loose part of the structure. Even so, every time we entered and saw the Labubu out of place, a chill ran down the spine. Rachel said I should have touched him without realizing it, but I knew it wasn't that. One night, I put the doll leaning very firmly against the dresser wall and closed the bedroom door carefully. Hours later, I heard that sound again, 3 light beats, followed by silence. I got up from the living room, crossed the corridor, and opened the bedroom door. There was Labubu, fallen on the carpet, now a few centimeters from the exit, almost as if he had rolled towards the door. Rachel started to get really annoyed when, one dawn, she woke up with the sound of something scraping on the floor. He ran to call me, and when we turned on the light, the doll was leaning against the door frame, as if he had tried to leave the room. The detail that made me freeze was that the door was closed inside, and there was no way he moved by himself that way. We decided to put it back in the closet where we found it, closing the door well. For a few days, the beats stopped. But the relief didn't last long. One night, when entering the room, I realized that the closet door was ajar, and Labubu was again on the dresser, facing the bed. After that, I began to feel observed. It was as if, whenever I passed through the corridor, the doll followed my movements with that fixed gaze. Rachel, who used to lay at the situation, began to avoid sleeping in the room. Every night, it seemed that Labubu was getting closer to the exit point, as if he really intended to leave the room. One morning, I woke up thirsty and went to the kitchen. When passing through the corridor, I realized that the door to the master bedroom was wide open. And there, right in the middle of the corridor, in front of the staircase that led to the living room, was Labubu, perfectly positioned and facing me. There was no denying it, that was not a coincidence. I took the doll with trembling hands and put it inside a box, sealed it with adhesive tape, and left it in the garage. The next morning, the box was open, and Labubu, sitting on it, as if waiting for me to find him there. Rachel and I moved out of the house shortly after. To this day, I can't explain what happened, but sometimes I still have nightmares in which I wake up in the middle of the night and find that doll standing on the door frame, as if it had finally followed me to another place. If you found a forgotten object in a rented house, would you have the courage to keep it nearby, or would you get rid of it immediately? I bought a Labubu online because I've been collecting these dolls for a while, and I always get excited when a new one arrives. The package arrived one morning, left by mail right in front of the house. I was strange right away because the box was a little crumpled, and when I opened it I realized that the doll was not packed as it should. The plastic was torn loose, and the toy was facing me, inside the box, as if someone had taken it out and put it back like that. That made me uncomfortable, but I tried not to give it so much importance. I took the box inside, and as I was in a hurry, I left the doll in the attic along with other objects I didn't use on a daily basis. At night, when I came back from work, I felt my stomach freeze. The same box was on the balcony table, exactly in the same place where the delivery man had left it in the morning. I was absolutely sure that I had kept it in the attic before leaving. At first, I thought I might have confused, that maybe I had left the box somewhere else without realizing it. But when I went up to check, there was the empty space in the attic, exactly where I had put the package. The retractable ladder was still closed. There was no sign that no one had moved there. It was at that moment that I began to feel that strange chill, as if someone had entered my house while I was away. I took the box from the balcony and, a little nervous, put it back in the attic, making sure to close the stairs well. I spent the night trying not to think too much about it, but the feeling that there was something wrong didn't leave my head. I woke up at every minimal noise in the house, imagining finding the package again somewhere unexpected. The next morning, I went to check the attic early. The box was there, but in a different way, open, with the plastic even more torn, and the Labubu turned on his back, as if someone had moved it during the night. I knew I hadn't left it that way. I stood still for a few minutes looking at that, trying to find some logical explanation, but nothing made sense. I decided to close the box again and go down quickly, without the courage to face that space for longer. During the day I tried not to think about it, but when I got back from work, the scene was repeated. The box was again on the balcony table. This time, the lid was open and the doll was leaning on the edge, facing the living room door, as if he was waiting for me to arrive. I felt such a strong chill in my spine that I stood on the sidewalk for a few seconds before entering the house. I entered slowly with my heart racing, and I kept looking at that motionless doll, standing in the box as if it had been placed there on purpose. I took it carefully and went straight up to the attic again, trying to convince myself that it was just some kind of strange coincidence. But deep down, I already knew it wasn't. I kept the box in the farthest corner, pushed some other things on top, and went down quickly, trying to forget. That night, I couldn't sleep properly. With each pop of the wood of the house, I imagined it came from the ceiling, exactly where the attic was from. Around 3 in the morning, I heard a dry noise, as if something had fallen upstairs. I stood still in bed, with my eyes open, waiting for some more sound. The silence returned, but the feeling was that there was something moving right above my head. The next day, I took courage and pulled the stairs from the attic to check it out. The box was no longer in the corner where I had placed it. I looked everywhere, moved boxes, looked even in the corners full of dust, until I found Labubu alone, right in the middle of the floor, out of the packaging. He was facing the attic opening, exactly at the point where I appeared when I went up the stairs. It was as if he had been left there on purpose, hoping that I would find him. The detail that gave me the most goosebumps was noticing marks in the dust of the floor, as if something had dragged the box a few meters before leaving the doll exposed. There was no way the package moved by itself in that way. I went down quickly, closed the stairs, and spent the whole day trying to find the courage to decide what to do. Did I throw it away? Did I keep it somewhere else? Just the idea of touching him again already made me sick. That night, I tried to avoid looking at the ceiling, but it was impossible not to think about the attic. I lay down early, but every pop of the wood seemed to come from there, and the silence between the noises was even worse. Around 2 in the morning, I clearly heard a sound of something being dragged. My whole body got goosebumps at the time. I stood still in bed, just staring at the bedroom door, waiting for the attic stairs to go down by themselves. But nothing happened. The noise suddenly stopped, making the air heavy and difficult to breathe. When it dawned, I took courage and went up again. The doll was no longer in the middle of the attic. I found him inside the box, but now the lid was closed and Labubu was again facing the opening, as if staring at me. I couldn't think it was a coincidence anymore. It was as if, every day, that was trying to show me that no matter where I put it, he would always come back to the same place. After that last time, I didn't go up to the attic anymore. I decided to leave the box upstairs, without touching it again, as if ignoring it was the only way not to make the situation worse. But even so, for a few nights in a row, I found the box on the balcony table when I got home. Always the same scene, the Labubu positioned facing the door, as if he were waiting. I no longer knew if I was getting paranoid or if there was really something strange going on. I ended up moving from that house months later, but I never forgot this episode. To this day, I don't know how to explain what happened, but I avoid buying anything that reminds me of that doll. I still remember the feeling of being watched every time I saw the box on the balcony. And you, have you ever brought something into the house that didn't seem to want to be kept, as if it had a life of its own? I always liked to collect dolls and figures, and I used to leave them stored in the guest room, since it was almost never used by anyone. It was in this room that I put the Labubu on the dresser, along with other pieces I had bought in recent months. At first it seemed normal, but soon I began to notice something strange. Every morning, the door of this room was open. I had the habit of closing before going to sleep, always, and yet she woke up ajar, as if someone had passed by there during the night. I thought it was something in my head, so I started paying attention. I checked the handle, pushed until I heard the door click, and even so, the next day, I found it open again. The feeling started to bother me because nothing else in the house seemed out of place, just this detail. I even thought that maybe I was forgetting to close, but deep down I knew it wasn't that. The door always opened by itself, and seemed to be connected to the day I put Labubu on the dresser. After a few days, I decided to take a test. I closed the guest room door harder than usual, almost slamming, just to make sure it wouldn't open overnight. Before going to sleep, I even checked twice. But the next morning, there was the door open again, and the detail that made me cold was to notice the inclined Labubu, as if it had been moved a few centimeters forward on the dresser. No one had entered that room but me. I spent the rest of the day trying to find an explanation, but it didn't make sense. The room had no air currents, the window was locked, and no one else in the house had reason to move there. I tried to ignore it, until one night, I got up to drink water around 3 in the morning. When I turned on the corridor light, I froze. Labubu was on the floor, outside the room, leaning against the wall, as if he had been dragged there. At the time I felt my whole body freeze. I looked at the guest room door, and saw that it was ajar again, even after I closed it before going to sleep. The strangest thing was the doll's position. It didn't seem to have simply fallen. He was on his side, facing the corridor, as if he had been placed on purpose in that position. I stood for a few seconds, trying to decide whether to take the doll or leave it where it was. In the end, I took a deep breath and took the Labubu carefully, running back to the guest room. I put it back on the dresser, closed the door, and this time I leaned a chair against it. That's the only way I managed to go back to my room. Still, I spent the rest of the night without sleeping well, with the feeling that something could push that door at any moment. The next morning, the first thing I did was go straight to the guest room. The chair was still in place, but the door was ajar again, as if it had been forced inside. When I pushed slowly, I saw that Labubu was no longer on the dresser. I looked around and found the doll fallen behind the door, facing me, as if it was waiting for me to open it. That gave me such a strong chill that I had to leave there for a few minutes to breathe. I then decided to keep the doll inside a box and leave it in the closet of the same room, trying to convince myself that nothing else would happen that way. But the next night, even with the doll locked inside the box, I heard a noise in the hallway. When I opened the door to my room, I found the box in the middle of the floor, open, and Labubu again turned to the guest room door. At that moment, fear took over me in a way I had never felt before. I knew I had closed the box well, but it was open, and the doll was facing me, as if it had been placed there on purpose. I ran to the living room. I stayed the rest of the morning on the couch with all the lights on, and without the courage to go back to the hallway. With each snack of the house, I shrinned even more, waiting to hear the door open by itself again. When it dawned, I went back to the corridor and found Labubu in the same place, motionless, but still turned in my direction. I took the doll without looking much and kept it in the trunk of the car, parked in the garage. I spent the whole day away from home, trying to think about what to do. Just imagining going back to find that doll back inside the house gave me a lump in my stomach. That night, even with Labubu locked in the car, I couldn't sleep in peace. Every time I closed my eyes, I imagined his scene again in the hallway, as if he had crawled out of the guest room. The door of this room was a point of fear for me, because even with no one inside, it still dawned ajar. I never found a logical explanation, but after this episode, I avoided using that room as much as possible. To this day, I don't know if it was just a coincidence, if someone was messing with me on purpose, or if there was really something strange in that doll. What I know is that I never left anything from the collection in rooms that I didn't frequent. And you, have you ever kept an object somewhere in the house and then found it in another without having any idea how it ended up there?